Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Faith and Finance Newsletter podcast. I am your host, Nick Garofalo. We are right in the middle of a kind of a multi-part series exploring, I guess kind of a lot. Contentment, desire, financial finish lines, the intersection of all of those things in the context of how we approach money, how we think about money, what it looks like to follow Jesus in this moment in the context of honoring the Lord with our wealth. So today's conversation is called "A Question Under the Question." So for context, I've heard it said, you've probably heard this as well, that the real answer to any question is buried like 3-ish layers deep. So you have to ask the first question and then the second question, and then usually the third question you can really get to the meat of the matter. And now, as an advisor, I have learned from many of the greats that the answer that a client is seeking often lies somewhere between me asking a better question and them surfacing a deeper answer. And these answers are never black and white, right or wrong, smart or foolish. They're often nuanced and complex and just require kind of holding all those things in tension together as we just thoughtfully consider a matter. So in practice, this means that simple, I put that in quotes, simple everyday questions like, should I max out my retirement accounts this year? Can I lower my tax bill? How much can we afford to give? Are we saving enough for kids' college? Or how much should we even save for that? Those all have miles of context beneath them that influence not just the answer that I might give, but the answer that the client actually kind of hopes to get, or the plan that they've already kind of committed to in their mind, regardless of the advice. And that's kind of where there's a lot of debate around whether financial advisors are more like coaches or brain surgeons, but basically it's kind of that interesting spot in between. These types of questions are really easily Googleable, okay? But they're anything but simple. Just for example, tax strategies are packed with trade-offs, compliance requirements, and implications for future you. The same goes for your retirement accounts, right? And that particular question about how much can we afford to give really requires you to do a lot of groundwork around enough, what enough means for you and your family, what that looks like, wants, goals, desires, surplus cash flow if there is any. These conversations like weave threads into marriage roles and career decisions and core beliefs and emotions and family of origin and religious convictions and like all kinds of stuff. And it's really easy to see how what seems like a simple question can lead to paralysis analysis. And I can tell you from experience, that's a terrible place to be. So I want to give you kind of a simple framework to help you navigate from the question that you're perhaps the presenting question, right, that you're asking, to the deeper tensions that are holding you in a state of indecision. Obviously, this starts with the tactical ask, right? This is the what should I do question that you're Googling about or asking a friend or a family member, right? This is the, how much, hey, honey, how much can we afford to give to this ministry? Phase 2 is kind of identifying some of the emotional drivers, okay? Behind that question, there's a whole lot of emotions, right? There's fears, there's worries, there's unresolved conflicts. So what am I afraid will happen if I don't do this? What will I regret if I do? What am I afraid that I'll regret if I don't? Like, there's just a lot of ways we can kind of turn that and look, but it's really important to identify some of those emotions because those are windows into the soul. They tell us a whole lot about our internal world, and God cares about that, right? He wants to meet us in our emotional life. Emotions, however, just to be clear, in my generation, gosh, we could be indicted for this on so many cases, right? So many counts. But emotions should never drive the bus, right? They should never actually lead us to make decisions. They should never fly the plane. But we should absolutely not ignore them or underestimate them. In fact, we do so at our own peril. All right, so phase 2 is emotional drivers. Phase 3 is the foggy gap, right? This is where your analysis starts to fizzle and break down. This is where you hit that paralysis point where you're like, I don't actually know if I need more information, if I need to sleep on this, if I need to talk to a counselor now, if I don't know. All I asked was about my taxes, and suddenly now it's like a whole marriage conversation, and that's a really frustrating place to be. Oftentimes, complex situations have multiple moving inputs and a ton of variable outputs. They're not sequential. They're not step one, two, three. They're not binary yes, no. And that's what complexity is. It's evaluating the trade-offs, and it does require a lot of information. And finding the gaps can be helpful for your analysis, because sometimes you actually do need more information. Sometimes you do need, to slow down and have an honest conversation with your spouse, right? But that's the foggy gap where a lot of times we get stuck. And then the last place is the faith question. This is just bringing in, like, what am I actually believing about God's provision? And what am I perhaps trying to control? Now, obviously, as believers, you can certainly start here, but I strongly advise that you also end here. Once you've done your best to love the Lord your God with all your mind, distilling the questions, the motives, the emotions, and the information that you need, surrender it to Jesus and ask what he thinks and what he may be teaching you or calling you to do. So let me just walk through a hypothetical example here, just kind of quickly. So say I'm talking with someone like Aaron. Aaron's been thinking about biblically responsible investing, okay? And you heard his pastor mention something about this a while back, and he now feels this tension knowing that his portfolio doesn't really match his convictions. But he didn't know that there was a better way. So, as a Christian, I know it's wrong to profit from things that grieve and hurt the heart of God. But let's face it, you can't just invest in companies you go to Sunday school with. And I'm also hearing, these funds can underperform and they cost more. So is it better to just, invest like the rest of the world and then use the money for kingdom growth? All right. It's a hypothetical Aaron quote there. That's not a dumb question. Okay. Not at all. And it's thoughtfully approached by many faithful Christians. So when I hear something like that, here's how I would try to walk through it with him. All right. So step one is just, on the surface, he's asking about investment strategy because his current plan feels out of alignment with his faith. But he's concerned about fees, performance, and also his current advisor might not offer this investment approach. So the emotional drivers underneath that, there's grief, right? There's perhaps guilt, there's uncertainty. He wants to be faithful, but he's not totally sure what that even means and what that looks like. In the real world. He's also afraid of making a sincere choice with good intentions that costs his family later, right? Higher fees, potential underperformance. Maybe that means working extra years because retirement gets pushed out. So then he lands in the foggy gap, right? And just for reference, this is where your enough line is missing. Because for Aaron, biblical investing sounds nice, but it's really hard for him to define. And without clarity on enough, it's really tough to know what he actually needs for retirement anyway, what he's on track for, what kind of trade-offs he can actually afford to make. When the finish line is fuzzy, okay, your personal wealth and personal income finish line, when that line is fuzzy, just about everything else is too. It's kind of like you're on a lifelong journey to a destination you haven't totally mapped out yet. You never quite know if you're on track to get there or even where there is. And the lack of clarity turns everyday, just ordinary financial questions into they just land in the foggy gap of indecision that leads to frustration and then lack of execution. So the faith question, part 4, is where these conversations usually lead. Because if he's convinced that there has to be a way to reconcile this tension, or if he feels a tension he wants to reconcile, what is he actually believing about God's provision? And where is he trying to buy certainty or control with the quote unquote, the right strategy? Underneath it all, Aaron is not just afraid of underperformance. He's really afraid that he'll choose faithfulness and accidentally hurt his family, right? He's afraid that he doesn't have enough margin to get this wrong, right? And by the way, he's not alone. And maybe you're him, and maybe like him, you just need permission to slow down long enough to ask yourself those 2 to 3 deeper questions so that you can make decisions with clarity, conviction, and unclenched fists, open hands, no pun intended. And this is why I keep coming back to the enough line, right? Because when you don't know what enough is for your family, every decision feels like it could be the one that breaks you. So you grab for certainty, the perfect strategy, the perfect fund lineup, the perfect tax move, whatever. The huge emergency fund. But when you can draw a sober and realistic enough line in real numbers, it just changes things. You can finally see what's required and what's available. And then that's where conviction and desire stop being a weight of, oh, I don't know, and the trade-offs are too complex, to like, oh no, I see a path here. We could actually walk down this. So I'll close with just one final question. Do you actually need the best strategy? Right? That first question that brought you into the Google search box, right? Or do you need an enough line that you can trust to be able to move in a direction with clarity and with confidence? So thank you for joining me. I will see you next week.